So yeah, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the two lovely talks that happened before mine. I'm really happy to be here. I'm thrilled to have been given the opportunity to present the work that we do. So yeah, my name is Manca Peskar and I work at the Science and Research Center in Koper, and I'm a doctoral student at Technical University in Berlin. And today I'm going to talk about Parkinson's disease, and more specifically about how can we detect early signs of Parkinson's using mobile brain-body imaging approach. So everything I'm going to show and talk about today is a product of the Twin Brain project. So it's basically a shared effort of all the consortium, Technical University in Berlin, University in Geneva, University in Trieste, and the leading partner, Science and Research Center Koper. So what I want to say is that the results are preliminary and therefore not conclusive as of yet. So first I'm going to set the ground, say a few introductory lines about the Parkinson's disease, about the event-related analysis, and how it might make sense to use it within the mobile settings using mobile brain-body imaging approach. The major part of my talk will be dedicated to the balance experiment that we conducted. I'm going to show you some preliminary results of that. Then we're going to go on to the walking experiment, where I'm only going to give you a hint of what kind of analysis are we going to apply and why. And we're going to conclude with some take-home messages. So Parkinson's disease, if we jump right into it, is the second most common neurodegenerative disorder, right after Alzheimer's, and the idiopathic Parkinsonism is the most common cause of Parkinsonism, affecting around 2 to 3% of people aged 65, and up to 10% of people aged 80 and above. It has been linked to the loss of the dopamine neurons originating from substantia nigra pars compacta, and as a consequence, we see a lot of and severe motor symptoms, and the motor symptoms are typically the ones that are the most severely affected by the disease. They encompass bradykinesia, postural imbalance, tremor, muscular rigidity, walking difficulties, and so on. What's devastating, in my opinion, here is that by the time the motor symptoms become manifest, already 60% of all the dopamine terminals are lost, and around 30% of substantia nigra, at least from the estimations. So what I'm trying to say here is that by the time we are able to diagnose the disease, by the time that we are able to detect it, we are already at a really late stage from the perspective of pathophysiological changes. So there's a huge avenue, the huge opportunity for early disease detection and also interventions, as a matter of fact. But so, going back to the motor symptoms, so the motor control is deteriorating, and patients try to compensate for that, for the loss of automaticity when it comes to motor control, by employing additional attentional strategies and attentional resources. The tricky part here, however, is that also the disease comes with the whole plethora of non-motor symptomatology, and cognitive impairment is one piece of the puzzle here. So it is quite accepted that the cognitive impairment becomes part of the disease in the later stages, but actually already in the early disease stages, 1 out of 3 patients experience cognitive impairment. And the most affected domains of cognition are attention, executive function, language, and visual spatial skills. So to sum this up a little bit, the motor system is deteriorating in Parkinson's disease. It starts relying more and more on the cognition, but the cognition itself, the cognitive functioning, is also becoming more and more impaired as the disease progresses. So you see there's kind of like this really tight interplay between the motor system and the cognitive system in the disease. And so the ERPs come into play here as being a very valuable tool or a valuable approach to analyze electroencephalography, because they are task-related, they are time-locked to the specific stimuli we want to manipulate that are trying to evoke either the sensory, the cognitive, or the motor processes. And it's a very elegant way to capture the brain responses that are associated with these. The ERP waveform that we typically observe represents summated inhibitory and excitatory postsynaptic activity, which means we cannot segregate or differentiate the inhibitory contribution of the brain from the excitatory contribution of the brain. But from what we've learned before from the Parkinson's disease, which really has its basis in the synaptic alteration, applying event-related potential analysis might be a useful approach to getting to knowing the processing speed and magnitude of these huge neuronal assemblies and also investigating then further on how they might be affected by the disease onset and also disease progression. So basically with the event-related potentials, we can use them to investigate neural correlates of cognitive load. And what I want to say with this is that, so we're going to take attention as an example, and we're going to see how we can use event-related potentials to get to the neurophysiological basis of the attention. So for example, I tell you, this is your target stimulus. You have to pay attention to it. It says blue, but it's written in red ink. Sorry, it's a bit small, but I think you can see it. So this is your target stimulus. Every time it pops up, you have to do the mental calculation +1. And in the end of the task, you tell me how many times you saw it. There will be, however, other stimuli popping up to the screen, which are interfering with your perception, which are trying to kind of make you confused, but you have the permission to ignore them. So really just focus on one specific stimulus. And so then if we average the brain responses for the target stimuli separately and for the regular stimuli separately, we see that we get like a markedly different ERP waveform, and especially around 300 milliseconds, which is the P3 component, and it's attributed to attention. I think you all know that here. So this amplitude change could be seen as a neurophysiological basis of attention, because this was the only thing that was different when we manipulated the stimuli. So this happens, or this is happening in normal brain, in the brain that it's not compromised, that it's healthy, that kind of supports optimal cognition. Then, however, you have the disease occurs, so there's an onset of the disease. You see there's synaptic transmission is disrupted, leading to disrupted network communication and also disrupted brain connectivity, finally leading to impaired cognition, impaired cognitive functioning. And so in the Alzheimer's disease primarily, because a lot of studies have been done on Alzheimer's disease, this affects the event-related waveform in two ways. The first one is that the latency of the P300 gets longer, so gets prolonged. And the second one is that the amplitude gets decreased. So it kind of, the disease onset and progression has sort of like a smearing effect on the ERP. It becomes like sluggish, not very brisk, sharp anymore. So the motivation behind what we tried, or what we are still doing, was first to see if this is also something that we can observe in Parkinson's disease. There are some indications in the literature already, but not as many as for the Alzheimer's. And secondly, all of these studies have been conducted in the stationary setups. So we wanted to see how the mobile, the addition of this behavioral change, or like the mobile conditions, might affect the event-related potentials. So MoBI, I think why we need it, I think Klaus made a beautiful job explaining why we need it and why is it essential to investigate or to include the motor component within the within all the investigations if we try to approach natural cognition, going away from the restrained laboratory setups and so on, if we want to get closer to generalizing our outcomes to the natural behavior. Embodied cognition framework, already Klaus went into it, so I will not dig any further. We are really trying to increase ecological validity of our studies. And yeah, it's a new field, so it's exciting. It's only been here for like a dozen of years, a bit more, and there is a lot of opportunity for new discoveries. So mobile brain-body imaging enables recordings of both cognitive and motor tasks simultaneously on behavioral and as well on neurophysiological level. This is especially important for the Parkinson's disease because we saw before the interplay between cognition and the motor systems are really intertwined. So MoBI is, I think, the perfect way of addressing this. Secondly, if we do the dual tasking paradigms, we can get a better grasp on what the division of attention that is being allocated to the motor task and to the cognitive task might be, and also in Parkinson's patients, right? And further on, in the patients, we can then also try to see which strategies might be better in all sorts of prevention, for example, falls prevention, because not being attentive to the motor commands or to the motor demands around you can have really fatal consequences. So if you are interested in the full protocol, it's online, you can read about it, but briefly, in this clinical trial, we were really trying to mimic real-life conditions by always combining a motor task with a cognitive task. And for the motor tasks, we decided to go with the ones that we constantly use. So the ones that really have a great value in terms of like everyday functioning. So we used the balancing and the walking, overground walking. And for the cognitive task, we used attention because this is also something that we use all the time, basically. Okay, so we go to the balance experiment. The aim, again, was to investigate cortical signature that is associated with cognitive processing during a balancing task in early Parkinson's disease patients. Here is a schematic of what our experiment looked like. So this is the preliminary data in which we've averaged 10 healthy and 12 PD patients. So it's not done yet, just to keep that in mind. And we had 3 task conditions. First of all, the single task semi-tandem stance. So this is the position in which they stood in the semi-tandem stance. Hands in hips, we had a 128 channel high density EEG. We had the high density EMG bilateral. There was a force plate that was measuring so the path length, the sway, the amount of sway that participants performed. And there was a presentation screen on which we portrayed our stimuli or just the fixation cross, which was the case in the single task semi-tandem stance. So they only stood here on the force plate. We measured the sway in 3 increments of 30 seconds, separated with the 30-second break. Next, in the single task Stroop condition, we've had participants sit down and they had to perform the Stroop task. These were the stimuli that you saw before. So they had to focus on one specific stimulus among many that were very similar and that were kind of trying to compete for their attention. Again, 3 times of 30 seconds with breaks in between. And finally, in the dual task condition, both of the single tasks were performed in parallel. So this is actually what you see here. Okay, so maintaining balance on the force plate and counting the number of occurrences of specific Stroop stimulus. These were, of course, randomized across participants and groups. And our outcome measures, so from the force plate, we have plenty of parameters in terms of the magnitude and derivatives. Today, I'm only going to show the center of pressure, path length, so the amount of sway that both groups did. So we're going to compare healthy versus PD between subject. We're going to compare single versus dual task within subject factor. And from the neurophysiological perspective, we're going to look at the ERPs across 300 to 600 milliseconds in 100 millisecond windows. So 3 consecutive windows of 100 milliseconds. Again, healthy versus PD, single versus dual task, and the last one, attend versus ignore. So really locked to the stimuli themselves. All right, so preliminary results, yeah? For the path length, for the amount of sway, we saw a main effect of group, and surprisingly, the healthy participants experienced or demonstrated greater amount of postural sway compared to Parkinson's patients. So this was at first a little bit interesting to us and was not expected because patients typically experience less postural stability, but on the other hand, there's also greater rigidity, right? So we don't really know as of yet what to make of it. We want to first analyze all the data and then get to conclusions. From the perspective of the ERPs, we observed a main effect of attend across the whole 300 to 600 time window. It's denoted by the arrows there. And so this means that for the attended stimuli, the amplitude was higher compared to as for the ignored stimuli. This was really a sanity check to see that the paradigm is doing what it has to do, that people are actually also performing what they have to, that they're counting the number of occurrences when the target stimulus is on and when they're ignoring them when they can, when they're allowed to. And then if we increase the alpha level to 10%, so we saw some trends for effects, and there was a task times group interaction, again indicated by an arrow, showing that only in PD patients the amplitude was higher for dual task as compared to the single task, which might indicate having more resources, basically taking more resources for performing the dual task as compared to the single task. And the second, margin effect was the task times attend interaction, showing that only for the attended stimuli, the amplitude was higher for the single versus the dual task, which might show that there were more resources that were free in the single versus the dual task. Again, these are, at this point, our speculations or a little hints of what the observed effects might mean, but we are very excited to analyze the data further and to pack it up in the paper. Next, we have the walking experiment. So again, this is a schematic of how the setup looks like. We have, again, the high-density EEG, the full body kinematics, which are the black straps around the body. We have the response devices, and we have high-density bilateral EMG, and we have the spectacle frame that has 2 LED lights on each side of the spectacle frame. And these response devices that are being held in the hands are there to respond to the lights that are occurring. So this is a real-life photo. You can see here this spectacle frame that goes like some 10 centimeters to the front from the eyes. And here you can see that there's like a purple light that it's blinking. We just caught it in the moment. And this is the lane on which they have to walk. So we have 5 different conditions. 3 of them include responding to the lights in either the narrow corridor or the wide corridor or the lane, and in the single task condition in the seated position. Additionally, we also have 2 single task walking conditions without responding to the lights. So we can have a full-blown design. And this is actually, so this is a recording of the very participant. It's a healthy participant, not PD patient. So you can see her walking up and down the lane, and you can see her avatar from the kinematics. Okay. Well, you saw it, I think. There you go. Okay. So they typically walk around 400 meters in each condition. So we are sure to get enough data in because all the movement artifacts and so on. So the walking experiment, as I said, has not yet been analyzed. We did decide on what kind of analysis we're going to go for, and the approach which we took was inspired by Martin Sieber, who published this paper in 2014, and he basically what you see here on this time frequency plots are single subject time frequency data. And on the x-axis is the gait cycle. So at 0 and at 100 is the right heel strike. And then in the middle is the left heel strike. So basically the x-axis covers the whole gait cycle. And what he shows here, it's really nicely shown in the first participant over here, is the gait phase specific modulation of the frequencies in the beta range. Okay, so it seems that the motor control during walking has something, so this is a portrait of an aspect of the motor control during overground walking. And this was done in healthy participants. And so if we take this together with the fact that in Parkinson's patients, the hypersynchrony has been found in the beta range if they were off the medication, and this improvement as soon as they got on medication correlated really well with the improvements in bradykinesia, we thought, okay, so why don't we use this approach and analyze for the first time the overground walking in Parkinson's patients to see how, because it is clinically meaningful, okay? So, as I said, we have not done that, but this is a single subject, our single patient. We just wanted to see if this is something we can do, if it's feasible, and we were really happy when we saw these plots that are really that kind of resemble what Martin Sieber already showed. Here is the single task walking in the white lane, in the narrow lane, and here is with the addition of the visual discrimination task again in the white lane and in the narrow lane. So it's only a single subject, not making anything of it. But for this particular subject, it seems that there were more cycles of synchronization and desynchronization if additional if cognitive task was added on top of walking. So what we are doing here in this clinical trial, we are really trying to put people in conditions that are meaningful for daily functioning and meaningful from the clinical perspective. We want to see if there are any distinct patterns of behavioral as well as of neurophysiological activity that might segregate or that are different in healthy participants and in Parkinson's patients. And we really want to see how this allocation of attention, so how much of attention and how this is, what kind of imprint this has in Parkinson's and healthy participants if we manipulate the cognitive and the motor parts. Again, this is the ongoing project, so we are still recruiting patients, we are still collecting data, and the final interpretations will be packed in the paper. So if you're interested, please follow us, and thank you again for your attention and the invitation, and I'm really happy to take any questions you might have.